She headlined pay-per-views. She finished opponents in seconds.
Ronda Rousey remains the UFC!
She appeared on talk shows, magazine covers, and Hollywood blockbusters.
These parties bore me to death.
From 2013 to 2015, Ronda Rousey was everywhere. She wasn't just a fighter, she was a movement.
Big throwdown!
She changed women's combat sports in ways that had never been done before and haven't been replicated since.
I'm more developed and mature as a mixed martial artist because you can't recreate that in the gym.
But for someone who once stood at the very top of the sports world, her fall was just as dramatic as her rise. So what really happened?
Thinking about killing myself in that exact second, I'm like, I'm nothing. I'm like, what do I do anymore?
How does the most dominant female fighter in history go from breaking records and breaking arms to walking away from the sport entirely? This is the tragic fate of Ronda Rousey. To understand Ronda, you have to understand where she came from. She was born on February 1st, 1987, in Riverside, California. From the very start, her life was defined by struggle. During delivery, the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, cutting off oxygen to her brain. The medical team saved her life, but the damage had already been done. The injury caused apraxia, a neurological condition that made it nearly impossible for her to speak clearly. For the first 6 years of her life, Ronda could not form a single sentence that others could understand. She would try to communicate, but the words that came out didn't match what was in her head. It was a prison of silence for a little girl who had so much inside her that she couldn't let out. Her family moved from Riverside to Jamestown, North Dakota, when Ronda was just 3 years old, so she could receive intensive speech therapy from specialists at Minot State University. Slowly, the words started to come, but by then, she had already learned something important. When your voice fails you, your body becomes your way of speaking, and that lesson would follow her for the rest of her life. But the hardest thing that shaped Ronda wasn't the speech disorder. It was the loss of her father. Ronda Rousey was the man she loved most in the world. Her speech therapy had required one-on-one time with a parent, so she and her father would spend entire weeks together while her sisters stayed home. He was her whole world. Then in 1995, everything changed. Ron had broken his back in a sledding accident years earlier, and the pain never went away. A rare blood disorder made it impossible for his body to heal properly. Doctors made it clear his condition would only get worse. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore. He drove away one day and never came back. Ronda was just 8 years old. She later revealed that she coped by telling herself he was on a business trip because that was the only other time he would be away for long stretches. She couldn't accept the truth. The loss left a wound so deep that it would resurface decades later at the lowest point of her career in ways she never expected. She also shared that her grandfather had taken his own life as well, making her father a second-generation suicide. Nobody in the family wanted to talk about it. Her sisters didn't bring it up. Her mother didn't press the subject. So Ronda buried the pain and carried it forward into everything that followed. She stopped feeling and started fighting. Her mother, Anne Maria DeMars, was not the type to let grief sit still. She was the first American woman to win a World Judo Championship in 1984, and she brought that same relentless mindset to raising her daughters. In their household, excellence wasn't a goal, it was the minimum. When Ronda was 11, her mother put her on the judo mat, and something clicked almost immediately. She had a natural feel for the sport that coaches recognized right away. She once compared the moment to Beethoven touching a piano for the first time. The mat was where she finally felt in control, where the frustration of years spent unable to communicate properly could be released through movement and force. Her mother's coaching was intense. During one training session, Ronda broke her toe, and her mother didn't stop practice. She reminded her daughter that injuries could happen at the Olympics, and she had to be prepared to push through. At home, her mother would sneak up behind her without warning and grab her, forcing her to always be ready. It was unconventional and brutal, but it built something in Ronda that most fighters never develop. An instinct, a sharpness, a tolerance for pain that bordered on the extreme. By 15, she was already competing at the highest level of junior judo. At 17, she became the youngest judoka to qualify for the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens. She lost in her first match, but didn't break. She came back 4 years later and tore through the competition at the 2008 Beijing Beijing Olympics. In the bronze medal match, she defeated Annette Bohm and became the first American woman to win an Olympic medal in judo. She dedicated it to her father, but bronze wasn't the dream. She had set out to win gold, and anything less felt like failure. She was ranked third in the world in judo when she walked away from the sport in 2009. The reason was simple. In judo, too much was left to the judges. Ronda wanted definitive outcomes. She wanted to control her fate completely. After the Olympics, she was broke. She shared a studio apartment in Venice Beach, worked as a bartender and cocktail waitress, and tried to figure out what came next. What she found was MMA, a sport where the outcome belonged entirely to whoever wanted it more. Her judo background gave her an instant edge. Her throws were explosive and unpredictable. Her transitions were second nature, but she had one weapon above all else that would make her legendary: the armbar. From the moment she started training MMA, it was clear she was different. She made her amateur debut in 2010 and finished her opponent in 23 seconds with an armbar. She went 3-0 as an amateur with a combined fight time of under 2 minutes. She turned professional in 2011 and never looked back. She joined Strikeforce, tore through the competition, and by 2012 had captured the women's bantamweight championship by submitting Miesha Tate with her signature armbar. The formula was simple: close the distance, drag her opponent to the mat, and hyperextend the elbow before they could even process what was happening. Around this same time, UFC president Dana White had made his position on women's MMA very clear. He had stated publicly that women would never fight in his organization. Full stop. Then Ronda Rousey walked into a meeting with him. 45 minutes later, he had changed his mind completely. She was that compelling. In November 2012, she became the first woman ever signed by the UFC and was immediately crowned the inaugural women's bantamweight champion. Her UFC debut at UFC 157 in February 2013 against Liz Carmouche was a historic moment. It was the first women's fight in UFC history, and it headlined a pay-per-view event. Carmouche nearly ended the night early with a dangerous neck crank and even dislocated Ronda's jaw during the fight, but Ronda escaped, turned the tables, and submitted her with an armbar near the end of the first round. The event sold 450,000 pay-per-view buys, outperforming many male cards. Women's MMA wasn't just legitimate anymore, it was profitable. What followed over the next 2 years was dominance at a level the sport had never seen before, from any fighter in any division. She submitted Miesha Tate again with an armbar in the third round at UFC 168, which sold over 1 million pay-per-view buys. She stopped Sarah McMahon with a knee to the liver in 66 seconds at UFC 170, her first finish that wasn't an armbar. She knocked out Alexis Davis in just 16 seconds at UFC 175.
Good overhead right by Ronda. And a big throwdown. Can she do it right here?
She submitted Kat Zingano in 14 seconds at UFC 184, the fastest title fight finish in UFC history at the time. And in August 2015, at UFC 190 in Brazil, she knocked out Bethe Correia in 34 seconds. Correia had crossed a deeply personal line before the fight by mocking Ronda's mental toughness and seemingly making light of Ronda's father had taken his own life, and she hadn't forgotten. She walked into enemy territory, stood toe-to-toe with Beth, and ended the fight in front of a stunned Brazilian crowd. During this entire run, she was training 3 times a day: judo and boxing in the morning, strength and conditioning in the afternoon, Brazilian jiu-jitsu in the evening. About 7 hours of work every single day. But even as she was putting in those hours inside the gym, she was being pulled in 1,000 directions outside of it. Hollywood had come calling. She appeared in The Expendables 3, Furious 7, and Entourage. She was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, ESPN Magazine, and Ring Magazine. She appeared on Ellen, Fallon, Conan, and Saturday Night Live. She had deals with Reebok, Bud Light, and Monster Energy. Her merchandise made up 31% of all UFC sales. Her presence helped drive a 62% increase in sponsorship revenue for the organization between 2013 and 2015. By late 2015, Ronda Rousey was the most famous combat sports athlete on the planet. She had more social media followers than LeBron James. Her phrase had gone viral and was being discussed in Time magazine. She was inspiring a generation of young women to try martial arts. Dana White later admitted that her success helped UFC events profit twice as much. Analysts credited 40% of the sport's sponsorship growth directly to her. She had 10 million social media followers at her peak, and women's MMA gym memberships were rising across the country because of her example. But somewhere in the middle of all of that, something dangerous happened. The hunger that had driven her from the beginning, the desperate need to prove herself that had been sharpened by grief and years of struggle, began to fade. The fighter who had once slept in her car was now sleeping on silk sheets. The fire that had made her unstoppable was being replaced by comfort. And in combat sports, comfort is the beginning of the end. Conor McGregor described the situation perfectly, comparing her trajectory to that of Rocky III. Rocky had gone from a hungry underdog to a comfortable champion doing endorsements and press tours, while his challenger was grinding in the shadows, training in silence with something to prove. The same thing was happening to Ronda, and almost nobody in her corner seemed to notice. Her coach kept telling the world she was improving. The media kept celebrating her as untouchable. Nobody wanted to say what was clear. Holly Holm had been training in those shadows. A former professional boxing world champion with multiple titles to her name, Holm was given almost no chance by anyone before their fight. The betting odds had Ronda as a 1,600 favorite. Holm was a 20-1 underdog. The fight was booked at the Etihad Stadium in Melbourne, Australia, in front of 56,214 fans, the largest crowd in UFC history at that point. The media framed it as another routine evening for Ronda before bigger things. Nobody seemed to be watching what Holm was doing in preparation. November 15, 2015. Ronda walked out with her fists clenched and her eyes locked in. From the opening seconds, something was wrong. Holm didn't panic. She moved constantly, staying just outside of reach, landing crisp, clean shots that snapped Ronda's head back with precision. Ronda charged forward, throwing punches, but she kept missing. By the end of the first round, her face was already bloodied. Her nose was cut. Her lip was split open. She looked confused and exhausted in ways that nobody had ever witnessed from her before. What the crowd didn't know was revealed years later. Ronda disclosed in her memoir that the very first clean punch Holm landed knocked out her bottom teeth and sent her into a concussive fog. She was out on her feet from nearly the beginning of the fight. She couldn't judge distance properly. Time wasn't slowing down the way it normally did for her when she competed. She was running on muscle memory and survival instinct alone, trying to make it look like she wasn't hurt so she wouldn't get swarmed and finish early. Ronda Rousey throwing wild punches and abandoning her technical game wasn't the real Ronda Rousey. It was a severely concussed version of her, fighting essentially blind. In the second round, Holm measured her, landed a left hand that made her stagger, pivoted to the side, and swung a left high kick that connected flush with the side of Ronda's head. She crumpled to the canvas, and the referee stopped the fight 59 seconds into the round. Just like that, the aura was gone. The most dominant fighter in UFC history had been knocked out cold in front of more than 1 million pay-per-view viewers. What happened next might be the most important part of this entire story. After the fight, Ronda was taken to the medical room. She sat alone on the cold concrete floor, shivering, tears running down her face, tasting blood in her mouth.
I was like in the medical room, and I was like down in the corner. I was sitting in the corner, and I was like, what am I anymore if I'm not this?
Outside, she could hear the crowd still celebrating, and in that moment, her entire sense of self collapsed. She had built her identity completely around being unbeatable. Without that, she didn't know who she was or what she was worth. She thought about the fans who had believed in her. She thought about her father, and she admitted later, in an emotional interview on the Ellen DeGeneres show, that she had thoughts of ending her life in that moment.
Thinking about killing myself in that exact second, I'm like, I'm nothing. I'm like, what do I do anymore?
The same dark place that had taken her father had found her in that room in Melbourne. Travis Brown, the man who would become her husband, was the one who pulled her back. He told her she was so much more than a fighter. And for the first time in her life, Ronda had to find out if that was actually true. She disappeared from public life for 13 months. No interviews, no press conferences, no social media. The woman who had been everywhere was suddenly nowhere to be found. The same media that had celebrated her dominance now endlessly replayed her knockout. Some fans turned on her completely. She gave the entire fan base the silent treatment, and that silence widened a gap between her and the people who had once adored her. Holly Holm later said that she believed Ronda withdrew from the fans rather than the fans leaving her, and that if she had simply faced the crowd and addressed the loss the response might have been very different. The UFC wanted her back, and Ronda felt like she owed it to the people who had believed in her to give it one more shot. In December 2016, 13 months after the home loss, she walked into the octagon at UFC 207 to face Amanda Nunes, who had since become the new bantamweight champion. She kept her media appearances to a minimum during fight week. Many close to her said she wasn't mentally ready. The fight lasted 48 seconds. Nunes threw heavy punch after heavy punch from the very first moment. Ronda landed nothing in return.
Nunes with a big right hand, Mike, and again, she hurt her again.
The referee stepped in before the round was even close to finished. There was no armbar, no comeback, just the brutal and final confirmation that something essential was gone. She never fought MMA again. Years later, she revealed the full truth. She had been dealing with concussions since her judo years, compounding them year after year without rest or proper treatment, because the culture of combat sports demanded silence on the subject. By the time of the home fight, she was already concussed going in, having slipped on stairs in the days before the bout. A poorly fitted mouth guard added to the problem. She told Dana White nothing about any of it because she knew they would have retired her on the spot, and she wasn't ready to let go of the only identity she had ever known. Dana White later said publicly that if he had known the full extent of her concussion history, he would have pulled her from competition immediately. The system that was supposed to protect her never got the chance, because she never let it. She joined WWE in 2018. Her debut at WrestleMania 34 was praised as one of the greatest in the company's history. She won the Raw Women's Championship at SummerSlam 2018 and headlined the first ever all-women's WWE pay-per-view, Evolution, later that year. She headlined WrestleMania 35 in the first women's main event in that show's history, losing the championship to Becky Lynch in a controversial finish. She walked away to start a family with Travis, then returned in 2022 to win the Royal Rumble and capture the SmackDown Women's Championship twice more. She also won the WWE Women's Tag Team Championship alongside Shayna Baszler, becoming the 8th Women's Triple Crown champion in company history. On paper, it was another historic run, but the second stint was never the same. The fan base that had once cheered her every entrance now booed her regularly. Storylines frustrated her, promised feuds never materialized, and the concussion issues that had ended her MMA career were quietly affecting her in the wrestling ring too, where even carefully controlled impacts were enough to aggravate the existing damage. She fractured her elbow at WrestleMania 39 and competed through it anyway. By October 2023, she posted on Instagram that she had retired from professional wrestling. 2 combat careers. Both ended by the same invisible enemy. She moved to a regenerative farm in Oregon with Travis and their daughters. She wrote her memoir, Our Fight, released in 2024, which detailed the concussions, the mental health struggles after Melbourne, the 2 miscarriages she suffered in 2019, and the grueling IVF process she went through to have more children. She opened up in ways that surprised even her most dedicated supporters. In October 2025, she published a graphic novel, Expecting the Unexpected, through AWA Studios. For the first time in years, she seemed to have found something resembling peace. And then came February 2026. On February 17, 2026, Ronda Rousey announced her return to MMA. She revealed she had first reached out to Dana White, but the UFC's new broadcasting arrangements made a deal impossible, so she took the fight elsewhere. Through Jake Paul's Most Valuable Promotions, Ronda Rousey would face Gina Carano on May 16, 2026, at the Intuit Dome in Inglewood, California. The event would stream live on Netflix. 5 rounds, featherweight, fully sanctioned under the unified rules of MMA. Gina Carano was the woman who had come before Rousey in many ways, the fighter who first proved to mainstream audiences that women could headline major events during her Strikeforce years. The two had never crossed paths during their fighting primes. Carano had last competed in 2009. Rousey hadn't stepped into a cage since 2016. Their combined age on Fight Night sits at 83 years. Critics immediately pointed to both women's lengthy absences and questioned what fans could realistically expect. Training footage Rousey posted in the weeks around the announcement divided opinion. Some saw genuine improvement in her striking. Others saw the same fundamental gaps that had gotten her knocked out twice before. Carano herself said she only agreed because Ronda personally reached out and asked. She said there was only one person she would come back for, and it was Ronda. The legacy that Ronda Rousey built during her prime belongs to history regardless of what happens next. She was the first woman signed by the UFC, the first female UFC champion, the first woman to headline a UFC pay-per-view. She generated more than 5 million pay-per-view buys across her 6 headline appearances in the organization. She was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame in 2018 as the first female inductee. Women like Amanda Nunes earn dramatically more today than any female fighter earned before Rousey's rise, because she built the foundation and demanded the sport take women seriously. Her 13% pay-per-view buy rate increase during her title reign remains the largest for any fighter, male or female, in UFC history. The UFC was sold for $4 billion in 2016. If you think she had nothing to do with that number, you weren't paying attention. The tragic fate of Ronda Rousey is that she never got to leave on her own terms. The concussions took that choice away from her long before she was ready to give it up. A brain built for war was quietly deteriorating while the world watched and cheered and demanded more. But what she left behind is more than most fighters ever dream of building. And now, at 39 years old, with a Netflix audience watching and Gina Carano standing across from her, she's writing one more chapter. Whether that turns out to be triumphant or heartbreaking, it will be unmistakably Ronda. Never safe, never quiet, never willing to leave anything unresolved. What do you think about Ronda Rousey's return fight against Gina Carano? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section, and before you leave, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to MMA Rivals so you don't miss the next ones.